I was sitting at my desk on a Tuesday morning when my phone rang. A man introduced himself and said he was calling about a position at my company. He said his daughter was interested in applying. He said she was excellent. He said she was exactly what I was looking for. He said he wanted to make sure she got a fair shot. I listened to everything he said. And then I made a decision that a lot of people told me was wrong. I did not hire her. And I still believe it was the right call. Welcome to Haely Stories. This is the place where you will find real and emotional women's stories that will touch your heart, make you feel seen, and remind you that you are never alone in what you are going through. If that is something you need in your life, then like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that bell icon so you never miss a single story. Now let me tell you about the phone call that made me make an unpopular decision, and why I would make it again. My name is Haely and I am 29 years old. I want to start by telling you what I do, because it is relevant to the story. I run a small but growing communications firm. I started it 3 years ago when I was 26, which is young to start a business, and I knew it was young and I did it anyway because I believed in what I was building and because I had spent enough time working for other people to understand exactly how I would do things differently. The firm has 7 employees now. 7 people whose salaries depend on the decisions I make. 7 people who came to work for me through a process that I take seriously, because good hiring is one of the most important things a small business does, and bad hiring is one of the fastest ways to damage something you have spent years building. I am particular about hiring. Not because I enjoy the process, I do not, particularly, but because I understand what is at stake every time I bring someone new into the team. It is not just about skills, though skills matter. It is about judgment. About how someone responds to pressure. About whether the person sitting across from me in an interview is someone I can trust to represent my company and my clients when I am not in the room. I say all of this because the story I am about to tell you is, at its core, a story about judgment. Not the girl's skills. Not her qualifications. Her judgment, or more specifically, a piece of information I received about her judgment before she had ever spoken a word to me. My name is Haely. I am 29 years old. And this is the story of the phone call I received on a Tuesday morning and the decision I made because of it. Had been looking for a communications associate for about 6 weeks. It was a junior position, the kind of role that requires someone bright and capable and willing to learn. Someone with good instincts and a genuine interest in the work rather than just a body filling a desk. We had posted the listing on the usual platforms and had received a reasonable volume of applications, most of which were fine in the way that most applications are fine, competent, unremarkable, easy to pass over. I was looking for someone who stood out. Not necessarily the most experienced candidate, this was a junior role and experience was less important to me than potential. I wanted someone who communicated well, who had thought about why they wanted this specific job at this specific company rather than any communications job at any company, and who had applied in a way that suggested they took the process seriously. That last criterion, taking the process seriously, turned out to be relevant in a way I had not anticipated. The applications were being handled by my operations manager, a woman named Riz who had been with the firm since the beginning and whose judgment I trusted completely. She screened the initial applications and brought the strongest ones to me for review. One application had not come through the standard process. It had come through me directly. Through my personal office number. From a father, his name was Mr. Rashid. He introduced himself politely and professionally. He was clearly a man who was comfortable making calls like this, which itself told me something about the context in which the call was being made. He said his daughter Zara was interested in the communications associate position at my firm. He said she had seen the listing and was very keen. He said she was a recent graduate with strong marks and real passion for the field. He said he had a few contacts in the industry and had heard good things about my firm, and he thought Zara would be an excellent fit. He said he hoped I would give her application serious consideration. I listened to everything he said. I was polite. I thanked him for calling. I said I would look out for Zara's application when it came through. I ended the call. And then I sat with it for a moment. I want to tell you what I thought about during that moment, because I think the thinking matters. Thought about what it meant that this call had been made. Not whether Mr. Rashid was a good father, I had no reason to doubt that he was. Not whether Zara was qualified, I did not yet know. But what the call itself revealed about the situation. Somewhere, a recent graduate who was supposedly keen on a position at my firm and passionate about the field had, instead of picking up the phone herself or sending a thoughtful application, allowed or asked or accepted that her father would call her prospective employer on her behalf. That was the information I was sitting with. I want to be honest about my thinking process because I think honesty is what makes this story worth telling. I did not dismiss Zara's application because her father called. I considered it because her father called. The question I was asking myself was not whether Zara was qualified. It was what the call told me about her. In communications, specifically in my firm, which works with clients who face real reputational challenges and who need to trust the people handling their public image, the qualities that matter most are judgment, initiative, and the ability to act independently in situations where the right move is not always obvious. Those qualities are demonstrated in small things as much as large ones. The way someone asks for what they want. The way they navigate situations where they have to advocate for themselves. The way they handle the gap between knowing they want something and actually pursuing it. Zara had presumably known for some time that she was interested in this position. She had, according to her father, seen the listing. The process for applying was straightforward. And yet the first contact my firm received about her was not from her. It was from her father. I thought about what that meant in the context of a job in communications, where I might one day need Zara to call a difficult client, or handle a challenging situation, or advocate for an approach she believed in against resistance. Where I would need her to act on her own judgment without someone else initiating the action for her. The phone call was a small thing. But small things are often the clearest information available. Zara's application arrived 2 days after her father's call. I read it carefully. I want to be clear about that. I read it with the same attention I gave every application that came through, and I was not looking for reasons to dismiss it. I was genuinely open to being persuaded that the phone call had been an anomaly, that it had been her father's initiative rather than hers, that the application itself would demonstrate the qualities I was looking for. The application was good. Not extraordinary, not the kind that immediately distinguished itself from everything else in the pile, but good. Her marks were strong. Her cover letter was well written. She had clearly done research on the firm and she articulated why she was interested in the work in a way that was specific enough to suggest genuine engagement rather than a generic template. On paper, she was a competitive candidate. I put the application in the review pile. I brought it to Riz. I did not tell Riz about the father's call. I wanted her assessment to be uninfluenced by mine. Riz read it and said it was strong. She said she would put Zara on the shortlist for interviews. I said, hold on that for a moment. Riz said, is there something I should know? I told her about the call. Riz was quiet for a moment. Then she said, what are you thinking? I said, I am thinking about what the call means in the context of this role. About what it says about how she operates. Riz said, it could mean her father is just overprotective. It might have nothing to do with how she works independently. I said, you are right that it might. But in a role where independent judgment is one of the core requirements, I am not sure I can set that information aside. We talked about it for a long time. I made the decision not to interview Zara. I want to be precise about what I decided and what I did not decide. I did not decide that Zara was unqualified. I did not decide that she was a bad person or that her father's call reflected badly on her character. I decided that the specific information I had received, that the first contact about her application had come from her father rather than from her, was relevant information about how she operated, and that in the context of this specific role, I could not set it aside. I sent a standard rejection, courteous, brief, thanking her for applying and wishing her well in her job search. I did not explain the reason. I thought about explaining it. I genuinely thought about it, about whether it would be useful or fair to tell her why. I decided against it because I could not do so without referencing a conversation that had not been intended as part of her application process, and because the explanation itself would have required me to characterize something about her based on her father's behavior rather than her own, which did not feel entirely fair. I made my decision and I moved on. I hired someone else. A young woman who had sent me a thoughtful cold email before the position was even posted. She had read an article I had written and had written to say it had clarified something she had been thinking about in her own work and to ask whether I ever took on junior staff. When the position opened 3 months later, she was the first person I thought of. I interviewed her. She was exactly what I was looking for. She has been with the firm for 4 months and she is very good. That contrast, between the way one candidate approached the process and the way the other had hers initiated, was not something I found easy to ignore. I found out about the response through a mutual connection. The mutual connection, a woman who knew both me and Zara's family in a peripheral professional way, reached out to me about 2 weeks after the rejection to say that she had heard I had turned down Zara's application and that Zara and her father were quite upset about it. She did not say this confrontationally. She said it in the way that mutual connections sometimes deliver information, gently, with plausible deniability about whether they are passing along a complaint or simply sharing news. I said, I understand that. She said, Zara feels she did not get a fair chance. She says she never even got an interview. I said, that is correct. She did not. She said, is there anything you can tell me about why? I thought about it for a moment, then I said, I can tell you that I read Zara's application carefully and I have no doubt she is a capable person. The decision was based on information specific to how her application came to my attention, which is something I am not going to go into in detail. I wish her well. The mutual connection seemed to understand that the conversation was over. I heard, through the same channel, that Mr. Rashid was not pleased. That he felt his call had been professional and appropriate. That he did not understand why his daughter had been penalized for something he had done with good intentions. I thought about that for a while. I understood his point. He had not intended harm, he had intended help. But intention and impact are different things, and the impact of his call was the information it gave me. He could not call on her behalf and then ask that the call be treated as though it had not happened. I want to address this directly because I think it deserves direct address. Was I wrong to make the decision I made? I have thought about it many times. I have had the conversation with Riz more than once. I have had it with a friend who runs her own business and whose judgment I respect. I have had it with myself in the particular way you have conversations with yourself about decisions that sit with you. The honest answer is that I am not certain. I am certain that the phone call was relevant information. In the specific context of the role I was hiring for, communications, client-facing, requiring independent judgment and initiative, the way a candidate came to my attention was not irrelevant. It told me something. I believe that. What I am less certain about is whether I weighted that information correctly. Whether the phone call, which may have reflected Mr. Rashid's personality more than Zara's, was a sufficient basis for a decision that affected her opportunity. It is possible that Zara would have been excellent. It is possible that the call was entirely her father's initiative and reflected nothing about how she operated professionally. It is possible that the candidate I hired, as good as she is, was not objectively stronger than Zara would have been. I cannot know those things. What I can say is that I made the decision with the information I had, and that the information I had was real and was relevant to the role, and that I acted on my genuine assessment rather than dismissing it because it was uncomfortable. Whether that was right is a question I am still sitting with. I could go back to that Tuesday morning and that phone call. There is one thing I would do differently. I would have told Zara why. Not in a way that was unkind or that placed blame on her father. But in a way that was honest. Something like, "The first contact I received about your application came from someone other than you, and in a role that requires independent initiative, that was something I could not set aside. I hope you understand that this is about the specific requirements of this role and not about your qualifications." I think she deserved that honesty. I think the standard rejection, however courteous, was the least fair part of how I handled the situation. She did not know why she was rejected. She only knew that she was, and that she had, in her own assessment, never been given a fair chance. That absence of information meant she could not learn from the situation in any useful way. She could not go away and think about what the phone call had communicated and decide whether she agreed with my assessment. She could only feel that something arbitrary had happened. That was not fair to her. I cannot undo it. But if a similar situation arises in the future, I will handle that part differently. The hiring process, particularly in a small firm where every person matters, teaches you things that you do not learn in any other context. It teaches you to pay attention to the information that arrives before the interview. The way someone emails. Whether they follow instructions. Whether they have read what they claim to have read. Whether the way they approach the process of getting the job tells you something about how they will approach the job itself. Most of the time this information is positive. Most candidates, in my experience, approach the process with the kind of care and initiative that tells you something good about them. Occasionally the information is less straightforward. What I learned from the Zara situation is something I would articulate this way: every step of the hiring process is information. Not only the CV and the interview and the references. All of it. The first contact. The way an application is submitted. The questions someone asks. The things someone delegates. I also learned something about the uncomfortable side of hiring that I think is worth naming. Making decisions that affect people's opportunities is one of the hardest things about running a business. Even when you believe your decision is correct, even when you can articulate a clear and legitimate reason for it, you are still making a decision that affects someone's life. That weight does not disappear just because the reasoning is sound. I felt it in this situation. I still feel it when I think about it. That feeling is not a reason to second-guess every decision. It is a reason to make decisions as carefully and as honestly as possible and to be willing to sit with the discomfort of not being certain you were right. I'm 29 years old and I run a firm, and I made a hiring decision that some people thought was wrong, and that I am still not entirely certain was right. I want to tell you what I know now. I know that the qualities I was looking for, initiative, independent judgment, the willingness to act on your own behalf, are qualities that matter in the specific context I was hiring for. I was not wrong to look for them. I was not wrong to treat the phone call as relevant information. Those things I am clear about. I also know that the way I communicated my decision to Zara was not as fair as it should have been. Giving someone a standard rejection when you have a specific reason is a form of information withholding that I would handle differently now. She deserved more than a template. And I know something about the complexity of decisions that affect other people's opportunities. There is no version of running a business where every hiring decision is clearly right. You are always working with incomplete information. You are always making judgments that involve uncertainty. The best you can do is be as honest as possible about your reasoning, including with yourself, and be willing to examine it when it is challenged. This situation challenged mine. I examined it. And my conclusion, after that examination, is that the decision I made was defensible but not beyond question, and that the way I communicated it was something I would change. That is an honest accounting. My name is Eshel. I am 29 years old. Her dad called me before she did. That one phone call made me say no to her application. And I am still thinking about whether I was right. That is my story. He called to help his daughter. I understand that. But help that removes the need for someone to advocate for themselves is not always the help it appears to be. I made a decision with the information I had. I am still sitting with whether it was the right one. Thank you for listening. This is Hayley Stories. We will see you in the next one.